Okay, so right, that takes us to 33, which is the arbitrary point in my head where I decided that we would start. So thank you all for joining us, and yeah, let me see if I'm not normally allowed to do the technical bit like sharing slides and sharing my screen. So there will be a general bit of Iain being technologically incompetent, but I'll try and keep that to a minimum. So I'm hoping you can now see my screen, which says why conversations don't change behavior. Yes, okay, that's good. Happy days. And I'm just going to move you guys so that you're not in the way. So what's the point here? So I guess for those of you who don't know me, I'm Iain Robertson. I'm the Director of Consulting and Client Services here at Inspirational Group, and therefore I have been kind of banging on about the ineffective nature of performance conversations to anybody who'll listen to me for about the last 25 years. And so Alice asked me whether I could frame that rant that I give on a regular basis into something that was a little bit more structured. So that's where we find ourselves now, is about a half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. We will definitely get you out on time to think about why it is that despite 20 years in my experience and more years in other people's experience of kind of structured, let's have good performance conversations, we don't get as much change in people's behavior as we might like. And fundamentally, this is not me saying you should train your managers in giving feedback. It's not me saying you need to be more coach-like. It's not me saying anything about the skills of managers or indeed even the skills of colleagues, but it's about the structures that organizations typically put around this stuff, which, in my opinion, makes it hard and sometimes impossible for those conversations to do what they are intended to do. So that's the mission. So what is the problem? This is the problem. So this is the problem. Now, this is 20 years. 20 years ago, I went on tour all over the world on behalf of a large multinational client who had somebody just read the GE forced distribution 2070-10. We all remember 2070-10, right? Some people are still doing 2070-10. And the problem was very simple. Yeah. I was going around the world and I was saying to everybody who I was talking to, whether it was in New York or Hong Kong or Bangalore, it was, right, this is how we're now going to measure performance. And there's 20% of you that will either be a 1 or a 2, and that means you're amazing. And then there's 70% of you who'll be a 3, which means you're everybody else. And then there's 10% of you who'll be a 4 or a 5. And 4 is, well, we need to give you a bit of help. And 5 is, well, nobody's ever a 5. And so the challenge is here, we're looking at any sort of system that says we're putting 70% of our people and we're tarring them all with the same brush. So how do we expect that to help people be excited, be motivated, be driven, do things differently? Well, I don't think we can. And as I was standing there doing my very best to explain to people that this was good, somebody at the back of the room put their hand up and said this: "Can I agree to be a 3?" I'm like, okay, what do you mean? He said, well, look, you've just told me that 70% of the organization is going to be a 3, right? And 20% of them are going to be a 1 or a 2, and only 10% of people are going to need help and support. Can I just sign something at the start of the year that says, even if I'm brilliant, I don't want to be a 1 or a 2, I'm just going to be a 3, and I don't have to do all of this. Yeah. And I thought, my first instinct, I said no, obviously, because that was what my client wanted to do. But that was a mixture of cynicism, because he was quite a cynical person in quite a cynical organization, but it was also somebody doing a cost benefit analysis in their head and going, you know what? This process whereby I sit down with my manager every X weeks, X months, and I collect feedback and they collect feedback about me, and we go through all of these hoops and so on. And you know what? 70% of the time, I'm going to be a 3. Yeah. And I'm quite happy to offset the 20% of the time I might be a 1 or a 2 for disengaging with this process. I will do my job, I'll do my job well. If you feel that I'm being a 4 or a 5, absolutely, I can re-engage with that process, but just leave me alone. And I thought, you know what? This is symptomatic of what is wrong with organizational performance management, is people don't engage with it because they don't see any value. They just want to be a 3. Yeah. So let's work out what's the problem. Now, I've done this for 20 years, yeah? So I've gone around the world and other organizations have asked me, so can we do feedback? Yes, of course. Now, do we do BOCA? Do we do AID? Do we do E squared, C squared? Do we do IDEA? Yeah, everybody's got their own feedback model, yeah? And we all, we go, right, if we do feedback, well, check. No, it doesn't work. If we teach people how to react to feedback, yes, learned direct of again others, doesn't work. If we create structures around those conversations and say every conversation must go A, B, C, D. Yeah, I remember that. Well, again, other clients said A, B, C, D. That doesn't work. If we change the forms, I've been asked to sell changed appraisal forms before. That doesn't work. Leader as coach. It's all very lovely, but it doesn't alter the fundamental problem. Yeah, skills are not, a lack of skill is not the problem. Now, it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. People need to understand feedback. Yes. They need to understand how to have a good conversation. Yes. These are necessary conditions, but they're not sufficient to make a change in people's behavior. Why is that? Tell you what it is, because this is your one-to-one. Yeah? Everybody has one-to-ones. And whether they are embraced and encouraged and excited, or whether people just are forced to have them, they happen. And in that conversation, we are expected to do the following things. We're expected to give feedback and receive feedback. We're expected to talk about people's development. We're expected to talk about reward. We're expected to talk about promotion and compliance. And we're supposed to give evidence, and we're supposed to manage people's engagement, and we're supposed to improve their motivation, and we're supposed to challenge them, and we're supposed to give them a voice. And we're supposed to do all of this in 1.5 hour conversation. No wonder these conversations don't work. They are overburdened and extreme. So I've boiled it down to 3 reasons that these conversations don't change behavior, all of which are related to that burden of conversation. But before I do that, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Yeah. So I know there's only 4 of you. So, oh no, there's 5. Look at that. 5. I can get 5 perspectives rather than just 4. And I've got a question, or a series of questions actually, that I'd like you to answer. So this works through a thing called Mentimeter. Mentimeter is an online platform. So all I need you to do, grab your phone and scan that QR code, or go to menti.com and put in that number. And that will allow me to gather your thoughts and feedback. So I've got 1 person in there. Thank you to Alice, you can join in too. 3, getting there. 4, happy days. Okay, and somebody's found the thumbs up button. Marvelous. Well done. Well done, the person who's found the thumbs up button. All 6 of you are now on. That's brilliant. So, I have a question for you. Again, thinking about all that stuff I've just talked about, I've picked the sorts of things that I've heard as I go around the world talking about this stuff over the last 20 years. Yeah. Now, obviously, you won't have heard these verbatim, but I'd like you to tick any of those that you've heard people say, or any of those that you have thought yourself at some point as you go through performance management processes, as you go through the process. Because I've heard all of these from a number of people over that time. So one person's giving us an answer. Now, of course, if you've never heard anything like that, that's fine. You don't have to give me an answer. That's okay. But I'm willing to believe that yeah, and you can tick more than one box. So if you've heard all of them, you can tick all 5. But if you haven't heard any of them, that's okay. All right. So let's see what we're hearing. Yeah. So the whole thing's more trouble than it's worth. We've all heard that before. We go through the ritual of setting. We've heard that before. People only set objectives they know they can meet. We've heard that before. And promotion depends more on who you work for than how well you perform. Now, if that's the perception of how these things work, no wonder engagement with the process is limited, and no wonder people's behavior doesn't change as a result of these conversations, because people believe these sorts of things. So I now have a second question for you, because I think that we can boil down some of these perceptions into 3 fundamental challenges that these conversations have, and the weight that they are expected to bear. And the first one is what I call contamination. And contamination is a problem we face because we overload these conversations. Because if we think about what feedback is for, yeah, so feedback, if I'm giving anybody some feedback, I'm giving them some feedback because I want to land one of 2 messages. Either this behavior that you are doing is effective and should be sustained, and I want you to do more of it. Check. You are doing a good job in this particular format. Or feedback is, this is something that you need to work on because it's not effective. So I'm giving you information about your behavior and the impact of your behavior. See all the many, many, many formats for feedback we've already talked about. But the challenge is that we contaminate that process with something else. And the something else is reward. Because for all sorts of good organizational reasons, HR functions over the years have said, oh, we're having feedback conversations. We also need to have reward conversations. And so that problem gets squashed together. So I'm as a manager being asked to have conversations about my team in terms of their behavior, but I'm also being asked to have a same conversation that feeds into their reward, their promotion, their bonus, all of those other things. And we're trying to do that. And those are 2 fundamentally different things. We're trying to have feedback conversations that are contaminated by reward conversations. And that's a real challenge. Now, I'm willing to bet that for most, if not all, of the people on this call, the reality is that at least one of your meetings every year conflates these two things. Yeah, at least one of these meetings every year conflates these two things. And that's a problem, because we're moving from a feedback conversation, which is about behavior, onto a reward conversation, which is about finance. And consequently, we have a number of challenges that face the problem. Oh, hang on. I've moved my Mentimeter onto a. People have started answering a Mentimeter question. This is not my current question. Never mind. And consequently, sorry, the financial focus versus the behavior focus. And we've got a number of things that happen when we do that. So first of all is managers may reduce the amount of developmental feedback they give in these meetings to their high performers, because they are also having to defend and justify reward and promotion decisions about those high performers. So if I'm saying that Alice is brilliant and amazing and deserves an enormous bonus, an enormous pay rise and a promotion, but the form I fill in has a whole bunch of things for improvement for Alice, that sends a contradictory message, or people feel it sends a contradictory message. So I'm going to dial down the amount of feedback I give to Alice that is developmental, so that I can send the right message to the organization about what I want for and from Alice. That's our first challenge. Second challenge is those people who are on the receiving end of that feedback are likely to become more defensive about that feedback for exactly that reason. If I'm in a meeting that tells me about how well I've done and what my promotion prospects are and what my reward prospects are, and that meeting focuses on things that I have not done very well, I'm immediately going to go, well, because I got this feedback, I didn't get my bonus. So I'm going to push back and go, no, that didn't happen, or actually that's not true, or there are all sorts of good reasons why that was the case on that particular occasion, and it shouldn't be taken into account when you're thinking about my reward. And all of that's happening in the same 30 minutes. Yeah, particularly in organizations where I've got a lot of direct reports, I'm trying to do all of that in 30 minutes. And the reality is that this scale that I showed you earlier, it did both jobs. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that 70% of people are in 3. Yeah, and that's a really broad church. That's people who are the 21st percentile in performance, all the way down to people who are the 89th percentile in performance. And we're lumping them together and saying, you get paid the same. Yeah, because we've decided that this is our distribution curve, you're very nearly a 2 and you are very nearly a 4, but we're going to pay you the same. And this is contamination made visible. This is people looking at that and going, yeah, you know what? Why would, again, can I agree to be a 3? And given that this is what's happening, we go back to that one of those contamination questions I ask you, the wise person only sets objectives they know they can meet. Yeah, it's really hard to generate discretionary effort when people see this and go, well, hang on, I could work hard enough to be solidly 60% and I'll get paid the same as somebody as if I worked hard enough to be 25%. Yeah, that's a lot of discretionary effort I'm choosing not to give because there's no benefit to me. There's nothing that doesn't make it worth my while. So contamination is a problem. Our second problem is value. And this is the question of if you hit an objective, what value do you get rather than the organization? Because let's be honest, in many organizations, individual objectives are simply the organization squashing its strategy down into manageable chunks of activity and then giving those manageable chunks of activity to individuals. So when somebody hits their objectives, does that person gain any benefit, or does it just go to the organization? So if you go back to your mentee, I've sent you a question. Somebody's already answered one of it. I'm guessing it's Alex who's answered one of it already. But the question is, think of an objective you've been set this year. Could you name right now what's in it for you personally if you hit it? And that doesn't have to be money. It could be exposure, could be growth, could be new skills. It could be all sorts of things. But could you name the thing that you get versus the thing that the organization gets? Let's see what people have to say. Okay. I love the honesty of this particular response. One person, brilliant, right? Why are you here? You know the answers. But for 80% of us, yeah, let's be very honest, I can't name what benefit I get over and above the obvious kind of generic benefit of I get paid and I keep my job. But what's in it for me? We just don't know what's in it for us. And that, again, has some significant consequences. Yeah. So we have the question, yeah, as I said, this is cascading macro objectives into deliverables, and the organization gets the benefit. The organizations, unless they explicitly get something, I'm giving my discretionary effort to someone else's goal. Particularly when we cascade organization objectives down, and where you're kind of, these are the board's OKRs, and therefore these are my OKRs, and therefore these should be yours OKRs. Well, and do you get growth? Do you get visibility? What is it? It doesn't have to be. And the organization gets stuff. Yeah, they get revenue if you're in sales. They get cost savings if you're in operations. They get delivery. Yeah, they get stuff that happens. What did the individual get? Well, we're not very sure. And I've deliberately made the overlap of those two circles very small, because as we've seen, most of us can't articulate what we get from our objectives over and above that very basic transaction of, I've got a job, I get paid. And what's in it for me? Now, this is all very well, you might say, but how do you make it work? Well, we have got examples of when this does work. So when it works, we have a large global flagship leadership program, and these were very busy people, yeah, because they had to be at the top of the performance scale to be on the program, and they all had demanding day jobs, and they all had significant responsibilities, and they gave up their discretionary effort to deliver real change projects for that organization, which delivered like 5 times the ROI of the program. They delivered $100 million of documented savings. They delivered culture change. They delivered motivated individuals. And why was that? It's because they could see value to them. They were giving up their time, evenings, weekends, overtime that they weren't getting paid for, to deliver a project that nobody had asked them to do, because it had value for the organization and it had value for them. They were getting the opportunity to put into practice the skills they were learning on this program in the real world. And the consequence was that the organization gained benefit as well. And if you give people that value, you go, then they will give you this discretionary effort that really changes stuff. If you don't, you'll get very, very sheep-like, survivor-like behavior, follower behavior, where people do just enough. They do just enough to hit the buttons they need to hit. So conversations are contaminated with reward. We need to work out how to fix that. Conversations don't articulate value. We don't describe value. The third thing that I think is a systemic problem is what I've called ownership. Yeah. So this is about the direction of the conversation. So who convenes the meetings? Who sets the agenda? Who drives the conversation? And again, I have a mentee question for you, which I think is the last one. So again, if you think about your last one-to-one with your line manager, who set the agenda? Yeah. So was it you? Did you go in totally setting, this is what I want to talk about today. This is what we're going to talk about. These are these things that are important to me. Was it your manager? They said, this is what we're going to talk about. Or was there no agenda? Was it just, we've got our weekly one-to-one, what's coming up? Yeah, what's coming up? Let's see what we've got here. We've got 3 or 4, 4 or 5 responses. Okay. Okay, so 1 for me, 1 for my manager, 3 for there was no agenda. Yeah, so control there, the authority there, is unclear at best. So what consequences does that have? Well, there's all sorts, obviously, but what consequences does that have for us as we think about how we help these conversations to do the thing we want them to do? If we think about this from a whose career is it anyway point of view, right? So it's a phrase I've used for many years. If your manager books the one-to-one, sets the agenda, at that point, the conversation is something that the manager is doing to the team member. Yeah, they are the subject of that conversation. He's happening to them, they are passive. If your team member books it and sets the agenda, this is something they are doing. Yeah, and the manager is at that point only one of several people supporting their career and several processes. They're looking at their online learning that's available. They're looking at their mentoring processes. There's all sorts of other things that they can be using. But it's active. I'm owning my career as the team member. I'm making things happen. And it's the same 2 people in the same room, but it's a very different psychological position. It's a very different feeling if I'm driving the agenda, because I get to talk about what I want to talk about, and I get to get some honest feedback from my manager. Now, this is brilliant, if I say so myself, if you can make it work. Because when I spoke to the same global client about this process, was that this is what happens. Yeah. This is what happens is if I set myself with my manager, yeah, they reschedule and then they reschedule and then they cancel. And that's a problem, because if we tell people you need to own the conversation, you need to set these meetings up, you need to come with an agenda, you need to drive the process, that only works if managers are treating these as if they would treat a client meeting. Yeah, because otherwise the organizational rhetoric just demonstrates how false this all is. Yeah, and people disengage even quicker. But if we have managers who treat these like client meetings, so if you have a meeting with a client, you would not reschedule that meeting with a client unless it was mutually agreed at a convenient time. You might go, I'm really sorry, something's come up, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client. I've double booked myself. Can we please reschedule for next week? Tell me your availability. And then you would absolutely make sure you went to that second meeting. And treating your team like your client is the way to get this ownership to land. So, reminder, this is not a skills issue. Yeah, we've talked about that because we've done skills for 20 years and it hasn't moved the needle. Each of these conditions needs something structural within the organization, not simply more training about how to have conversations, because we've done that and we know actually we can get 90, 95, 99% completion of conversations and very small amounts of behavior change. So these are the things that we can do, and they're easy to say and they're hard to do. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Contamination. Separate the documentation that feeds reward from the documentation that feeds development. And have separate conversations. So if you are giving feedback, if you are using your developmental conversations and they're independent of your reward process. Now, I get it. Yeah. People's performance during the year is one of the things we take into consideration when we're talking about reward. But we need to segment, we need to separate those two sets of conversations so people know where they stand and that they're more willing to engage with the feedback conversations openly and honestly because they feel independent. For value, yeah, attach a visible personal payoff to every, or at least to some of your objectives. Sometimes, again, the reality is that we all have to do bits of our job that are unexciting. Yeah, and perhaps not every objective can have a visible personal payoff, but most of them can. Even some of them can. And that becomes a conversation that you have with your team. Yeah, this bit of your job, I know this is the same as last year, but it needs to be done. This bit of your job, this is the opportunity for growth. This is the opportunity for change. This is the opportunity for development. And then ownership. Walk the walk as well as talking the talk. Saying you own your career, whose career is it anyway? Whatever your phraseology needs to be is fine if managers behave like team members are clients. Now, you can't cancel a one-to-one unless you have a mutually agreed replacement time that you then live up to. And your team are your clients. They are the customers of your leadership. So before your next appraisal cycle begins, ask yourself these three questions. Is feedback secretly or contaminated by reward? Probably. Does the individual benefit, not just the organization? So how do we make it clear what individual benefits are? And who is really driving that conversation? Because if it's the team member, brilliant. If it's the manager, again, performance is happening to them rather than being driven by them. So I did promise we finish a little early because there were fewer of you and therefore there were fewer opinions. That does give us time for questions if anybody has any questions. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to explore ideas. What would you like to talk about for the remaining 7 minutes of our time together?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Suzanne. Thank you very much. It's really interesting. And I think you've managed to do what a lot of us haven't quite in the past, which is really try to dissect this and work it out what it is exactly that's not working. I just want to ask you, how do we avoid this separation of feedback and reward conversations without people having the impression that they're being given more to do?
So that's a great question, and I think it's part of a wider conversation that we typically need to have with people who lead and manage others. That I often find people saying, "Well, this is it over and above my day job." Yeah, and I go, "Well, hang on, no, this is your day job." Yeah, if you lead and manage people, having these conversations is not in addition to what you're being paid to do. This is what you're being paid to do. And so I think part of it is reframing those conversations as core to the role of anybody who has a people leadership responsibility. And I think also it's if we couple that split with a third option of giving people more ownership, actually as a leader, I'm having to do less because I am going to those performance conversations as an open book, because my team member has set the agenda and my team member has set the time, my team member is driving what's happening, I'm just there to support and help them. Yeah, so actually I'm not doing more, I'm just doing it differently. But I do get that the challenge in terms of getting people to feel that is real. But I think I'd combine the two and have people think, okay, yeah, as a leader, I mean, it might have more actual time, but it probably has less emotional investment and less intellectual preparation time required. So I need physical time, but it's physical time that's kind of easier to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I like the ideas, and it would be nice to think that in a sense feedback happens all the time, and feedback can happen on the weekly one-to-ones or the regular one-to-ones, and that separating out a sort of more of a reward thing. I mean, then you've got the problem, of course, that some of the people to be appraised, for want of a better word, well, they just wouldn't set an agenda. They wouldn't set a time, because people hate these things, don't they? People hate the idea of a performance appraisal. We don't, none of us particularly like being judged. It has to flow sort of seamlessly from a relationship where there is mutual respect and trust.
Agreed, and I think perhaps one of the ways that might be possible, because I don't have all the answers, sadly, I wish I did.
Oh,
One of the things that
shame.
one of the things that might help would be to have the ownership be about the regular feedback conversation. So I, as the team member, I manage those, but as the leader, I still own the reward conversations and the end of year conversations. So I own those because they're a necessary part of our performance process, and then they feel different because I'm organising one flavour of conversation and you're organising another flavour of conversation. And one of the things that, again, about giving ownership is that if I, as the team member, feel that I benefit from talking to my manager once a week, I can do it once a week. But if I feel I need to talk to them once a month, I can do it once a month. And so there's a little bit more flexibility in that, I think. Helena, your hand is up.
It is. My apology. Oh, that's a bit horrid. Sorry. Apologies that I can't have. I can't do this, can I? Oh, let's see if I can. Is that better?
Oh, I can hear you now. Yes, a little bit.
So I've got three things.
Oh,
one is, if meetings are going to be a priority, it needs to start from the top and be honoured by people at the top. So it's no good saying one person can't cancel, the CEO or whatever. It needs to honour it, otherwise it makes no sense. I'd suggest that training for both manager and individual on how to do this would be sensible. And for the individual, to keep a record of evidence of their achievements, the challenges that they've overcome, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of those. So I was in Chicago earlier this year with a leadership team who were a relatively newly formed leadership team. And one of the things that came out of the offsite, which was fascinating, was that their boss didn't know that her team didn't have regular kind of horizontal one-to-ones. And she said, well, this is ridiculous. I sit with my peers regularly every week, so I know what's going on in the rest of the business. Why are you guys not sitting with each other for the rest of the business? And I want you to do this now. And to your point, because she said, this is what I do, I prioritize these conversations with people because I think they're important. I need you to do the same. That was a very clear action that came out of that. So yes, the role modeling thing is vital. And I think, again, the training on how to do this, because it is a mindset shift, it is absolutely a mindset shift for most people and most organizations. Yes, I think that's necessary. It's necessary to have a conversation about how you might do this. And as you say, maybe that's come with the two things that you're proud of this week and the one thing you need some help with. It could be as simple as that. Yeah. But yes, just giving people some guidance up front to as this changes the way they've done things in the past. Yeah, I think I would agree. It would, and clearly, I know people who might help with that. But that is a thing that could be done internally. Absolutely. Okay. Right. Well, I did promise to finish on time. This is on time. I'm happy to stay on and have any further conversations if you'd like, but I also will happy to release you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your contributions. And I hope I've given you something to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.